Hello, and welcome to the Deadline Club's presentation of AI and the Future of Journalism. Whether it was scientific curiosity that brought you here or just raw existential fear, we're glad you came. And I can promise you that you'll find the next 90 minutes interesting and informative. I'm Peter Seke, the president of the Deadline Club. We are the New York City chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, SPJ, the oldest journalism advocacy group in the country. And if you're wondering, the answer is yes. We have fun like this all the time. This evening's webinar is but one part of a series of events that we put on throughout the year. In fact, next week, on March the 23rd, we're holding a luncheon at which we'll be inducting 6 luminaries of New York journalism into the Deadline Club's Hall of Fame. They are Gay Talese, Robert Cairo, Ken Auletta, Carol Simpson, Edith Lederer, and Anthony Mason, and you're invited too. In fact, as a Deadline Club member, you'd get to go to all of our events, and usually at reduced rates. You'd also get access to an hour of free free media legal advice every month, and you'd get membership privileges at the Salmagundi Club and its bar and restaurant on Fifth Avenue in the Village. And what does this all cost? Well, you need to be an SPJ member, and the dues for that are $75 a year. But if you're already an SPJ member, it costs you nothing to be a member of the Deadline Club. How can we afford to do that? Oh, we make it up in volume. But one day we may come to our senses and start charging dues. So I would join today. And I'll put links into the chat here so you can check us out. You can check out our website, the Deadline Club website, the SPJ website, and next week's Hall of Fame ceremony. And now for tonight's event. It was put together and is being moderated by 2 of my predecessors, Bob Anthony and Steve Dunlop. And now to take you through the rest of the night, here is Steve Dunlop.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening, everyone. We've got a lot to get through, and during this important discussion, we'll be asking our own questions and be on the lookout for yours as well. If you have a question, just enter it into the chat bar that you should see on your screen. We'll be monitoring that and bringing them to your attention. And if you're going to tweet about us in real time about the panel, you'll see the Deadline Club Twitter handle is @Deadline Club, and feel free to add the hashtag AI so it gets noticed by the larger AI community that follows that hashtag. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to review a little bit of history. So I'm going to hop in and do a quick screen share, and hopefully you all can see that. In one sense, artificial intelligence, or AI, is nothing new. Computers have been aggregating inputs for longer than most of us have been alive, and it's had an impact on journalism almost from its beginning. Let's go back to election night, 1952, on the CBS television network. The race for president that year was between Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson. In the clip you're about to see, you'll see anchor Walter Cronkite, he's there on the right, and correspondent Charles Collingwood interpreting real-time election results from a mammoth device developed by Remington Rand. You see it there in the center of that image, a so-called electronic brain named UNIVAC. Let's listen in.
Let's turn to that miracle of the modern age, the electronic brain UNIVAC, and Charles Collingwood.
This is the face of a UNIVAC. A UNIVAC is a fabulous electronic machine which we have borrowed to help us predict this election from the basis of the early returns as they come in. Let me tell you a little bit about the theory of this. This is not a joke or a trick. It's an experiment. We think it's going to work. We don't know. We hope it'll work. Can you tell us what your prediction is now on the basis of the returns that we've had so far? Have you got a prediction for us, UNIVAC? I don't know. I think that UNIVAC is probably an honest machine, a good deal more honest than a lot of commentators who are working, and he doesn't think he's got enough to tell us anything about yet. But we'll be back with him later in the evening.
Well, and by the way, fair use on all these clips. This is educational after all. What Charles Collingwood didn't know is that just before CBS went on the air, UNIVAC, I'm going to try to advance that slide there.
To that vertical of the modern age, the electronic brain UNIVAC.
Sorry about that, folks. There we go. Whoops. We've got to go back a couple of slides here. UNIVAC predicted a landslide for Eisenhower. There you see it right there. It's awfully early, but I'll go out on a limb. This was an election outcome so contrary to the conventional wisdom at the time that at first CBS didn't believe it, and therefore it didn't air it. An Eisenhower landslide, of course, is exactly what happened. Well, the electronic brain became something of a cultural sensation. At the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, visitors could submit a question to a librarian, and UNIVAC would print out an answer on the spot. The database included books, dictionaries, encyclopedias, and bibliographies. There was the sense that this was just the beginning, and of course it was. Fast forward to this year, 2023, 13 miles east of that Seattle World's Fair, a company called Microsoft has made a reported $10 billion investment in what could be described as UNIVAC's direct and highly evolved descendant, OpenAI, and its world-famous progeny, ChatGPT, which, as anyone who's ever used it knows, is as different from UNIVAC or Google as Niagara Falls is different from a leaky faucet. We asked ChatGPT if it's anything like UNIVAC. Here's the answer. As you can see, it writes in a commanding, authoritative style that has already upended higher education. For instance, The Atlantic recently did this take, featuring a former student at Amherst, showing how ChatGPT would have written a 4-paragraph essay that he was assigned to write, comparing the views of two philosophers on nationalism. There's the question, and there's the essay. ChatGPT got the job done in 10 seconds. The student's comment on Twitter says it all. We are witnessing the death of the college essay in real time. And if you thought this couldn't get any more bizarre, maybe you missed the New York Times article whose author had an extended conversation with Bing's new AI chatbot, which wound up creepily expressing its love for him. So, what does all this mean for writing in general, and in particular for that special fact-based brand of writing we think of as journalism? There is so much more to AI than ChatGPT. There's a whole raft of products that those of us who report, write, and edit the news for a living find both disturbing and exciting. So tonight we'll be spending the bulk of our time looking at the entire AI field and its impact specifically on journalism, for good and for ill. We'll be exploring what AI programs hold the most peril for journalists, which hold the most promise. How exactly do these programs work? We'll take a close-up look at one in particular. We'll look at the threat that AI would seem to pose to journalism jobs, especially for investigative journalists, and the result of a study on that topic that might surprise you. And lastly, we'll look at some practical hacks for determining whether content is AI or the real thing. Our panelists tonight: Garance Burke is a global investigative journalist with the Associated Press, leading a team examining the impacts of technology on society. Burke's specialty is how AI technology intersects with daily life, and she joins us tonight from San Francisco. Ian Silvera, communications consultant and founder and editor of Future News, a blog focused on innovation and invention in and around journalism. Ian joins us tonight from the West Midlands in the UK. He is burning the midnight oil. Emilia Diaz-Struck is the data and research editor for ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Diaz-Struck led a ICIJ experiment using AI to write investigative pieces. She'll walk us through their findings tonight. Diaz-Struck joins us tonight from Washington, D.C. Justin Gluska is the founder of Gold Penguin, a web design and marketing agency based in Florida. He blogs regularly on technology topics affecting small business, including a recent column, call them posts these days, I still call them columns, outlining some interesting hacks for distinguishing AI content from that generated by real people. Justin joins us from Miami. I'm your host, Steve Dunlop, Deadline Club past president, formerly with CBS News, now head of a communications training firm known as Dunlop Media, joined by my co-moderator, Robert Anthony, also a Deadline Club past president, a veteran consumer tech columnist, and a former senior writer at PC Magazine. I'm going to jump in and ask Bob the first question. You've covered this field for over 30 years. From your perspective, Bob, what is going on here?
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing on such a fabulous array of guests here. Everybody has a different skill. Everybody has a different unique view on AI. But basically, I'm both thrilled and worried about what I see. I'm an old newspaper reporter at the old Milwaukee Sentinel, and I'm used to delivering stories that have been seen by multiple eyes, from the reporter to the city desk, to the copy editor, to the copy desk chief, to the news editor to lay out the page, and even the guys in the composing room used to triple check what was up there. So that's what worries me about the what's coming in AI, that we don't have the human aspect. And I have a couple questions for some of the guests about that a little bit later. Recently, you might have heard there was a shakeup at CNET, the very respected CNET News, very respected outlet for tech news and other coverage. They laid off a lot of people, and they changed and the editor-in-chief stepped down to a new position, and the name of the new position is Senior Vice President of AI Content and Strategy. So it's an indication of where things are going, and I'm not sure if that's the way I want things to go. So my newspaper career and my tech career at PC Magazine makes me wonder how well these things will be fact-checked.
I'd like to bring in Garance Burke right now. Garance, your job at the AP has involved you looking at some of these programs inside out and reporting on them and their impacts on society. What alarms you and what gives you hope?
Well, thanks so much for having me. You know, what I would say is that our job as journalists is not necessarily to opine whether AI is good or bad, but rather to tell the public how it works, what's going on under the hood, who is harmed, who benefits, and why. And so what we've really focused on doing with the team that I've been leading at the Associated Press is looking at the spread of predictive and surveillance technologies globally across many government functions. Sometimes this can be, you know, really a positive thing. It can help to, through the use of natural language processing, preserve African languages that otherwise would be lost because they aren't being logged, you know, as English is in iPhones. But other times what we found with some of our investigations is that these tools can really, if based on historical data, harden some of the inequalities that are already present in our societies. So we can talk a little bit more about that later, but we've been really focused on helping the public understand what's going on under the hood, how these tools work.
What's going on under the hood is something I'd like to take a look at right now. In putting together this panel, I came across a company headquartered in the UK that is actually, their product is actually used by, they claim, thousands of businesses at this point. Frankly, it's one of the most visual and cutting edge examples, scary and promising at the same time, examples of AI that I have ever seen. So I'm going to jump in and share my screen once again. Oops. Okay. Here we go. There it is. Their homepage says it all. Create videos from plain text in minutes. I shuddered when I saw this because I'm imagining jobs for TV journalists, like I was for so many years, not to mention actors and presenters of all kinds, disappearing into thin air before our eyes. The Harvard Business Review calls technologies like this AI with a human face, and notes that at the core of the technology are avatars that it calls digital humans. A few days ago, we interviewed one of the brains behind this technology. His name is Daniel Verton. He's the head of creative at Synthesia. This really seems destined to revolutionize video of all kinds, but especially video as far as it goes in the art of journalism. I'm going to jump back in and share the screen once again, and let's go to that interview with Daniel Verton. Daniel Verton, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Steve.
I'm wondering if you could explain for us, journalists, but lay people, most of us, and not terribly technically inclined, exactly how Synthesia works.
Absolutely, very happy to. So this is what our platform looks like. It's very easy. You can use it directly in Google Chrome. So it runs in your browser. And really, all that you have to do to create video is to click on new video. And then you have the option of using any of the Synthesia Studio templates that we create for the benefit of our users.
And to be clear, these are not real people. These are digital creations, correct?
These are AI avatars, correct. So they are based on real human actors who we had to get in front of a camera to create their digital twins. And obviously we have explicit consent from them and explain to them what the process takes like. And then after we record 2-3 minutes of video with said actors, we're able to create the AI avatar. And you'll see in a second that you can even create custom avatars of yourself to then create any amount of content. I do believe that in the generative AI era, content creators and storytellers, including journalists, will be net winners. And the reason for that is if you think about historically, the latest technology waves like the internet, mobile, deeply disrupted the content distribution elements of the value chain of content creation, right? Obviously shifting away much value from the old gatekeepers, so media owners, the newspapers and TV stations, to the new gatekeepers, the online platforms. But if you think about it, the internet or mobile, those waves didn't essentially fundamentally change content creation. For sure, we were able to create more efficient sensors. We were able to go from film to user-generated content because we were able to shrink those sensors. But what's really fundamentally different about the generative AI era is that content creation and the workflow of content creation is being disrupted instead of the distribution channels.
Let me ask you about the situation involving a typical television news anchor, let's say, who has to do a broadcast at 6 p.m. and hang around for a broadcast at 11 p.m. Theoretically, from what you're telling me, you could take a few shots, a few minutes worth of this anchor and have them deliver the 6 p.m., let's say, live. And if there are changes, as there always are for the 11 p.m., those can simply be done virtually. And although the technology is still in its infancy, we can imagine a Chuck Scarborough or a local New York news anchor or a national news anchor actually being generated virtually for the later editions of a broadcast. Is that where you see this going?
That's absolutely possible, but let me take that thought one step further, because I think what's really, really exciting about generative AI is that what you're describing there, for example, a news anchor creating their own custom avatar with their custom voice, enables fully new digital experiences, right? So imagine a scenario, for example, where the news anchor of the 6 p.m. news is able to create with their own digital likeness let's say a personalized news stream that is obviously fed through the editorial news that the editorial team or the newsroom actually creates. But instead of having to stick to 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. news, they're able to create that personalized stream and really create new ways of capitalizing on the brand of their.
So you can actually create an avatar that becomes yours. You keep the copyright. You keep the rights to the image.
Absolutely, and any video that you generate as well, according to our terms, is your IP. So the video generated as well is obviously yours, and you have full control over your custom avatar. If you want, I can show you mine actually too, so you see how you can work with custom avatars within your own studio account.
Sure, let's have a look.
Hello, Steve. Great meeting you today. I really enjoyed our conversation on generative AI and how it might impact the role of journalists. I am a big believer that storytellers, including journalists, will play a crucial role in shaping the experiences AI video enables.
Wow. It's interesting to see the AI Daniel Verton right up against the real Daniel Verton, and you can see there's a significant difference there. But will people be able to tell? And of course, Synthesia is selling a product here, so we got to put that skeptical eye on all of this. Ian Silvera, you're also in the UK, as is Synthesia. Your blog, Future News, focuses on what's next in this field. What is your reaction in particular to what you just heard? And do you agree or disagree with what Verton said there, that this technology will be a net win for journalists?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Let me take you back to the Mad Men era and another Brit called David Ogilvy. And he actually made his career going around with Dr. Gallup around Hollywood. And what he was really doing was making and breaking careers. Why? Because he was turning up with his studios with the polling rankings of each Hollywood star. And we know, and I'm sure you know, Steve, as well, ratings is something that has trickled into the wider broadcast industry. So it's something that really resonates with
really
this. I can imagine an AI being developed that has top ratings, never fails, and brings all the views. This is already around to an extent on the Twitch platform. There are virtual AI generative hosts there. Overall, yes, I think through content creation, and it's something that I've tried out myself just with voice by way of example. So with producing videos, you could see an amazing script being created or a long form piece, and then that easily being created into a video through such a program. But I think we all got a sense there was an element of synthetic nature about it. It was a little bit too clean. And as a sort of consumer of news, I wouldn't like to digest my news at 10 from such an avatar.
Yeah, well, what struck me about it was obviously the difference between real and the AI generated. But this technology is only going to get better because we can see it's evolved even since it's existed for just in the last few years. I'm curious if any other panelists want to chime in on this, and in particular about that comment that this is going to be a net win for journalists. Any of you, and in fact, Amelia, we haven't gotten to you yet. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, this is very interesting, and in one sense, like on our side, like what we have been doing is not only like not Garance was talking about investigate, like presenting the benefits of AI to society. On our side, what we have been doing is how AI can help investigative journalists. So, and we're not using it for having, I don't have an avatar presenting the news or like the result of our stories, but in our case at ICIJ, what we have been dealing, and that's a trend that is happening more nowadays, is dealing with vast number of records. So you might remember the Panama Papers or the Pandora Papers, those were involving more than 11 million records, each one of those in many different shapes and formats. And it would take years to just one journalist alone to start going through all those files, opening them, reading them, and then doing all the reporting. So in our case, we have been trying to figure out how can it help us, and like and to Bob's comment, like actually would that reduce the work of journalists? Like actually we need journalists more than ever. That's a bit the conclusion that we come across, and we have run a couple of experiments while working with AI in many different projects. But for instance, there was one project we worked on that was called the implant files, where we actually gathered more than 8 million records on medical devices and the impact and adverse event reports and the impact, what happened when a patient had a medical device and whether the patient had an injury, had a malfunction, or died. So, and we got a tip from a source saying, well, actually, it seems that these reports are not always reported correctly. It's like there is a narrative that tells what happened with the patient, and afterwards you see how the event was classified. So we built a model to help journalists screen all these millions of records and identify whether basically we taught the computer to identify death. And we came with, like, I would say, like, to simplify the process, with like kind of a dictionary with more than 3,000 ways in which like death could be expressed in those narratives. And sometimes it would say the patient expired. So, and when we were running those tests, we started checking and validating the information. And suddenly we figured out and we saw that Sometimes it was not the patient who expired, but a relative of the patient. So that's a false positive, or the device expired. But we were able to screen all these millions of records. And then afterwards, humans, we had 11 people going through the results. So instead of millions, we had thousands. And we went through those one by one. And we were able to afterwards like have our results. And we were able to identify in a 5-year period more than 2,000 cases in which a patient had died, but his death had been identified or classified as a malfunction or as an injury. So, and that leads to like, what can we do with public policies? We have been also using it, for instance, in cases like Panama, like we didn't use it for Panama Papers, but later on, like dealing with massive amounts of records to identify financial statements or key type of files that will allow us to advance in our reporting. And like what we see is like there are different ways in which you can use it. You can use it to like help find leads, find stories. But if you're using and doing a full analysis, in our case, it has involved like a full team across the process. We have also developed as a result, and talking about fact checking and validation, we are obsessed with that. Like, because like that example that I mentioned from implant files, we come across like another project, we were exploring illicit financial flows, like FinCEN files. So we were exploring thousands of transactions. And actually, they're extracting the information. The machine couldn't do it all perfectly. We needed humans. So it involved, we did a kind of a human party to get the data in shape. But we had to fact check the information. So we had like addresses where we figured out like half of the locations were wrong. Or more than that.
Of the locations were wrong, and this is AI at work. This is
like people filling in the forms wrong. So, and then the AI helped us identify the wrong information, like fact check the addresses, and then we had humans going through the results of the AI to get like a final verification of the process. But so
it's a double-edged sword, is what you're saying. It can be good on one side, helping journalists investigate, but on the other side, you're discovering that the AI itself can be faulty.
Well, it depends on the quality of the data that you have. So if the data is wrong, then if like Switzerland and China, which was the case, I always remember, had the same country code, and you're like building a model to represent that, you would get the flows wrong, because then the money, like the information that you're getting, that you're using as a starting point, is incorrect. And what we saw is that then like some like authorities were using sometimes AI to identify these illicit money flows. But if you're dealing with this starting problem of the quality of the data that you have, then the results cannot necessarily lead you to the right results. So you need a lot of data fact checking, data validation, and review how you're building your processes to see what outcomes can you get and how do you present. And also there is a process of transparency. How do you tell that to your audience? So when we have used AI for different reasons in our projects, we then build a full like methodology piece that we explain how we use it. Because then like to that question, oh, can I trust? Like we didn't let the computer do everything. The computer was part of the process. It was a tool that helped advance our work, that otherwise we would still be looking at some of those files, and we might not be like, we had no project in years, I would say, looking at all that together.
I'm sure you've heard the old saying that a computer is only as good as the input, right? There's the old garbage in, garbage out philosophy. Is that what's going on here? And I'd just like to open this up. Justin,
could I add something before you move on, Steve?
Absolutely, Bob.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I appreciate what Amelia said, because I was attending, I was virtually attending the Mobile World Congress conference in Barcelona. I was just watching it online. And there was a panel, multiple panels on AI. And what she said about the human element enhancing what the data that the AI scraped was exactly what was coming out of MWC. There's a CEO of a company named Iconic. The last C is replaced by a Q. Iconic.ai, Lauren, Kunze. And in her keynote address, she said, humans will matter more than ever with AI. Her company does the same type of avatar that you just displayed, Steve, with Daniel. and she markets it, they market it to multiple corporations, which use it for even fashion shows. And she said, we need humans in the loop to keep AI in line. Human experts are going to matter more than ever before. And there was one other item that she said. She said that AI, if you have a great ChatGPT or a great avatar, point it internally at your staff for their use. Don't point it at the public. It'll irritate the public, but in Amelia's case, it'll enhance what you do. It'll be an asset, and then your reporters will go further from what the AI has scraped. But don't use it for a direct contact with customers. That's not the way to handle it. She seemed very aware of the necessity for the additional human contact to the AI, and I found that refreshing.
In other words, let's have AI work with journalists as a tool to augment the human ability to verify information. That's a really interesting take. I'd like to bring in Justin Gluska from Gold Penguin. You blogged extensively on AI for the past year, and I know you wrote recently that about some hacks for distinguishing AI content from that, generated by the rest of us. We'll be getting to that later, but I wanted to ask you about a prediction that's getting a lot of traction, namely that by 2025, 90% of all AI content of all online content, I should say, will be generated by AI. And by the way, if AI wants to learn from existing online content, you can see the problem. There's going to be a feedback loop, because if the more content that is generated by AI that AI then learns from, who knows where that's going to wind up? Does this scare you? Should it scare us, or is this 90% figure hype in your view, Justin?
So I definitely think it's concerning. I think there's a few levels to when these things are going to take place. The first level is kind of happening right now, where AI is kind of able to already recreate lower quality content. So you can ask ChatGPT to spin you up an essay or an opinion, because it doesn't actually have one, but an opinion piece on a simple topic, and it can do that. So that's barrier one. I think a lot of bloggers, I wouldn't really call them bloggers, I'd say more publishers, people that are posting content that are kind of just scraping the bottom barrels of trying to get by. I think that's kind of going to be replaced. We're seeing it in real time. We have ChatGPT that could write better about a historical topic than an average adult. But I think the next level is going to be, is it going to replace specialized writers, which is as AI does get better and it starts crawling better information, working on better information, what's going to happen? And then the last level, which I think is where a lot of journalists get concerned, is like, can you train a model that, like for me, Justin Gluska, can I have a model that actually talks like me and produces content like me? And given enough quality input, the answer is yes. But I think, and this might sound like a cop-out answer, but I think that true journalism is still obviously going to be based on the person behind it. And so I can go and train a model and publish a bunch of content that seems like it's written from me, but at the end of the day, I know it's not. And so again, I don't really know what kind of answer that is, because the truth is, like, we don't know. And so if a bunch of this online content in the next 4 years is written by AI, what's going to be genuine? Well, something that you can't replace with a robot authentically is opinions. So ChatGPT could sit here and pretend and give us opinions and talk on things, but at a certain point, big journalists often have credibility because of their own opinions. And so I think that's kind of going to be hanging on. Of course, you could theoretically replicate that with an AI, but true journalism is really based on the fact that you are a human and you have these creative bits about who you are. So theoretically or synthetically, everyone can get replaced online. But true journalism kind of should still prevail, because if anything, this should filter out the fluff to the people that are actually there on the ground, reading these stories and writing about things.
You mentioned opinion that can't really be recreated by an AI program like ChatGPT. And this is probably a good time to introduce, and I'm just going to hop in and do another screen share. There is an issue that that one of our New York papers flagged quite recently about what it calls AI bias. that bias has somehow been baked into ChatGPT's algorithms in particular. The New York Post recently asked ChatGPT to generate an article about Hunter Biden in the style of CNN. And there you see it right there. You see it returned this dispassionate, seemingly authoritative defense of the president's son. But when the paper asked for the same article written in the style of the New York Post, the bot responded, "I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, I cannot generate content that is designed to be inflammatory or biased." Now, some people would look at that and say, well, there's opinion right there that is baked into ChatGPT. So your response on that, or I'm curious what the panel thinks of this issue.
I think it's definitely very interesting because AI itself is kind of only what the makers created as. And so if you want to train a model that is based on data that is like favored in one direction or not, then you'll have outputs that kind of mirror that. And so that's definitely a big thing that's coming up. Even the CEO of OpenAI himself, actually, I think he tweeted that today, that AI needs regulation, and there is no regulation for this right now, which is insane to think that the CEO of a company that's probably taking the global stage right now is even saying that what we're seeing in real time is concerning, because bias is going to be baked into products because we all have biases. And so, yeah, it's definitely very concerning.
Garance, I'd be curious for your take on this, since you work examining AI so closely, and we know it has been already a great tool for journalists. What about this baked in the cake thing that the New York Post flagged?
Well, I think it's a really important point. And just to echo what Amelia and Bob were saying earlier, it's sort of a basic question that data journalists have been grappling with for a long time, the sort of garbage in, garbage out problem. If your data that you're basing either your ChatGPT output on, or a predictive policing tool used by police only captures a certain piece of the population, or only captures writing in the style of a certain publication, what the machine spits out is only going to magnify that bias. And so what we've really tried to do is to go deep on understanding the very data that these models are built on, whether you're talking about AI in the child welfare system that some critics argue is based on the over-policing of families of color in the past, or whether you're looking at surveillance tools used in China that measure people according to racial and ethnic categories, including whether folks are Uyghur or not, right? So some of these choices that are made in the classifications in the data themselves bear further examination. And one other thing I'd say, just to pick up on what Amelia was talking about, this notion of humans in the loop, I think what we've really sought to do is to train more reporters to investigate AI, both to produce better journalism through the application of it, but also to really understand the impacts that we humans and machines have on one another. So that sounds very sort of, futuristic, but if you think about it, humans really are impacted by what computers serve up to them, right? And there were actually even some interesting studies showing that in the specific case of social workers who were using a risk scoring tool to decide which families were more likely to pose harm to their children, when the computer model told them that these families scored high on the risk scale, they were something like between 30 and 15% more likely to recommend that the families be investigated. So to go have social workers knock on these families' doors. So I just think that's such an interesting area for us to keep probing as we continue along in this brave new world. How exactly are humans in the loop working with computers? And then it's also important to think about the AI hype. Is it really AI that's doing the work, or are there lots of humans in the background who are really kind of controlling a lot of the gears and the choices?
Bob Anthony, yeah, I was going to say, is that you there, Bob?
Yes, go ahead, Steve. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was going to ask you for your thoughts on this issue, since you've been covering the field for so long.
I'm going to yield for the moment to Ian because I see he had his hand up. He wanted to make a comment, and I'll follow up after he's done.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bob. Yeah, one of the second order impacts that I've written on and focused on is what I call the lazy narrative syndrome. And what I'm really looking ahead for is if AI does sort of enact itself in the newsroom and lots of journalists keep using it, my worry is that a lazy narrative could be created across the media. When these synthetic articles are created, or even if you're just pulling facts for context in a story, there's going to be an element of duplication. So as it relates to bias, that's one of the big issues that I think may come up. Just to give you an example from 2008, there was a study by Cardiff University in Wales looking at the whole of the UK and the biggest newspapers. At that time, many years ago, 60% of all news stories were wire copy. So just think on that. And I would also urge a distinction between quality journalism and also mass content, which sort of Justin was alluding to earlier.
That is fascinating. Bob, go ahead, but wow.
No, I'm glad he used the word lazy journalism, because I was actually going to say just about the same thing. You get used to journalism that's I mean, I'm used to meticulous journalism that's triple checked, and I have a certain level of I'm pretty sure that what's being reported is good. And with this AI generated content, and I'll just give you a quick example. Apologies, Garens, because this is coming from the AP. This is an AI assisted sports story from February, which came across my app back then, and I had to print it out and save it for the. But it has a simple lead. Jason Tatum and Kevin Durant meet when Boston hosts Brooklyn. Tatum is fourth in the NBA, averaging 31 points per game. Durant is seventh, etc. It goes on to talk about how the Nets are doing against division opponents, how the teams have done in the past, the top performers, the last 10 games, all information scraped by the AI algorithm that helped generate this story. The very last line says, the very last couple lines says injuries. And in the very last line, it says Kevin Durant. So the algorithm was smart enough to get the stars of the two teams together in the lead and talk about the history of the two teams this season, but wasn't sharp enough to know that Durant was injured, which any sports reporter in February, when he was still with the Nets, would have known. And any sports reporter who had handed in the story with that lead, Jason Tatum will meet Kevin Durant in tonight's NBA game, any sports writer would have been slapped by the sports editor for not knowing what was going on. So yes, I worry about this lazy journalism, which is like, it's mostly correct. And it's like, the mistakes are like, most people will say, oh, I can deal with that. But for me, no, I like my journalism as correct as it can be.
You know, what this reminds me of is, Ian so rightly pointed out, wire copy. So many radio and television stations that I worked at, and early in my career, I actually worked on the broadcast desk at the Associated Press, which generated wire copy that could be read directly by journalists or news people, sometimes even disc jockeys at radio stations around the country. And the line always was, well, you know, we saw it on the wires. The implication is it has to be true. One day, are we going to be looking at AI and saying, well, you know, ChatGPT said it had to be true. You know, hopefully we'd be smart enough to avoid that trap. I'm seeing some comments. We see one comment on the chat box that I suppose this is referring to the Synthesia example. It sounds like the Stepford Wives.
Yes.
We've got one question here, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out to the panel. How can this digital twin technology be misused, and will it actually benefit journalists? Won't corporately owned networks kill the human anchor and end up owning avatars that photograph nicely and tell the news? I've got an opinion on that, but I'm curious what the rest of our panel thinks.
I'm happy to jump in. quickly on this one. One of the elements that I've been looking at is how AI also interlinks with news phenomena. And one of those news phenomena is news deserts. And one of the things that I'm potentially worried about, I mean, we've both got elections coming up in 2024, how easy it would be to wheel up a AI generated news site, go through the social media platforms and use that for nefarious purposes on either side of the political aisle. And you can also do that in video. And we saw that earlier, how easy that could be. So that's just one example that I would point out.
So just to put a fine point on that, what you're saying is a nefarious site going around capturing video from legitimate news anchors, journalists, putting fake words in their mouth, which we just saw is technology that already exists, and pushing it out as legitimate information when in fact it's very nefarious disinformation. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or specifically using, it could be a news desert, so an underserved area of the United States by way of example. So it could be a print product that an AI is creating anti-Democrat or anti-Republican stories. Or equally, yes, Steve, to that point, it can be video capture and regurgitating that in nefarious ways.
Amelia, I see you want to join in on this, and then we'll go right to Garance. Go ahead, Amelia.
Yeah, I think there are some key points, and I will go back to the human factor that I keep bringing every time we talk about AI, because I think this will differentiate us in terms of what kind of journalism we're doing. How do we differentiate ourselves as journalists? So one thing that Garance was mentioning is, well, the capacity of investigating these things. So if there is an election coming, we need to have the capacity of investigating these kind of things. And that is the differentiating aspect that we will have in terms of like what kind of information would the audience would be able to have access to. So how credible are we as journalists? What are we doing our job? So, and part of our job is being able to investigate this. And also at the same time, there are many stories that are not online. They're meant that the investigative process and like any journalistic story is not just about the digital content. There are many things that are happening in areas where people don't even have access to ChatGPT, don't even know what ChatGPT is about. And those stories also need to be reported. We need people going there, reporting those stories. And if we're discovering things that are connected, let's say, to corruption and let's say buildings and construction projects, well, we would need to go and check what's happening in real life with those construction projects and those things that we are discovering digitally using many different tools, not only AI, like, because AI is not there alone. So I do think that we would need to be prepared to investigate these topics, to be able to distinguish what's going on and tell those stories. So like we have, like the audience needs, like we help build a critical audience. So the audience understands what are the problems, what are the risks, and decides how to consume and where to go to find information. So I think we need top quality journalism again. So that's part of the thing. So it's not just about AI.
Yeah, and so a computer, as good as ChatGPT may be at unearthing things that have already happened or parsing facts and turning them into essays and so forth, it's all based on historical. When you've got something breaking that's actually happening in the field, you know, no computer can go out and investigate that. Am I too far off base here, Garance? I'm just curious for your thoughts on that.
No, I think you're right on, Steve. And I think that our job is also to tell our audiences why this matters and what's at stake. You know, what are the ethical and moral and legal consequences for the introduction of these technologies in so many different realms of our lives. And Bob, don't you worry. Any thoughts about AP's use of AI are certainly welcome. That's not my side of the house. I do the investigating. Our folks in sports and finance use those algorithms to generate smaller stories. But I will say, from what I have heard, that has freed up more journalists at AP to do more rigorous work. And I think that this is an iterative process. So we do have another team that's helping local newsrooms implement AI solutions. It looks very different in different places. But I think that wherever you're looking at either the implementation of AI in journalism or our aptitudes for investigating it in the field, it's important to think about those cultural contexts and to not, somehow start believing that AI is akin to a human being and has thoughts and feelings and registers as we do. I'll give you one concrete example, Steve. When we were looking at some of the surveillance tools that went into place around the world during the pandemic, governments really took advantage of this opportunity to guide their decisions remotely and implement more AI in different realms of our lives to track our health, to view our locations, etc. And that looked very different, for example, in Hyderabad, India, than it did in Perth, Australia. And both governments in both countries really decided to go all in on the use of facial recognition. In Australia, they were using their COVID app to try to solve crimes. Police got access to that data and then had their way with it. So I think to the previous point of there not being any regulation, we really are in a situation where journalists alone can, in our role as part of the fourth estate, point out what are the pitfalls as well as the promises, and sometimes directly impact policy, as we've seen with some of our work. We've had some real impact with our investigations of AI and child welfare, for example, with the Justice Department now looking into something we've been writing about. So I think it's a high impact area for journalists to wade into, and it's also one we need to do very, very carefully and really redouble all of our fact checking so that we make sure that we are not only understanding these very complex statistical models correctly, but that we're also translating for our audiences in simple terms that they can understand.
You touched on something, Garance, that I'd like to ask Ian about. Is or does the public perceive AI as quote unquote real, or perhaps becoming so smart that it somehow becomes real? Now, this gets into the question of, do computers or programs like this, do they actually have consciousness? And Ian, you actually wrote about this. You quoted the work of a philosopher. I think he's still around. I think he's like 90, 91 years old, John Searle. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, a fellow countryman of yours. Yeah, in short, it's the Chinese room thought experiment. And basically, it's John is stuck in a room. He's passed Chinese symbols underneath. But the good news for John is that he's got a computer program. So he runs through the symbols on these questions and he gives the right answers every time. And the point being is the people outside of the room who are receiving the answers think this must be a Chinese speaker. The point being here is that John Searle's really pointing out that there's no context, there's no consciousness, there's no other judgment here. It's a little bit like the synthetic nature of ChatGPT and those language models. And as other panelists have pointed out, I think that's the key thing. Good journalism, includes context, includes unforeseen, circumstances that aren't in hardcore data sets. And at the moment, AI can't really bring that in at all. I'm really interested in my own research about the known unknowns. And even if you look into the ancient world, if you asked a simple question of ChatGPT, such as what was the literacy rate, it may come back with an answer. If it does, it would be wrong because no one knows. And that I feel is the real interesting area. And as others are saying, this is where the human element comes in. And AI can ultimately be a fantastic tool, but it will probably reshape the journalist, maybe as a sort of truth holder and truth shaper, but it will ultimately perhaps always lack that context. Therefore, it won't be ultimately powerful over the journalist.
So what you're saying is you're not terribly worried about the 2001 Space Odyssey scenario where the computer basically says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that." You're not taking over the ship. That's not a concern of yours.
I don't have those dystopian views. I know I have seen things written like that. I have a lot more positive view of the future, and particularly what some of the panelists are talking to now. And I think it can be used as a force for good. And just quickly on the truthness and truth audit. So I think that's a really interesting piece of work, and Oxford University are looking into that. Because obviously now, as it relates, if you ran a simple Excel function on data journalism, you can sort of put a finger up in there and say, oh, that looks sort of right. But the mass scale of data that AI is using, you can't quite do that. But yeah, overall, to the point, I feel quite positive about it. And I think it's going to reshape quality journalism in the future.
Bob Anthony, we're monitoring the chat box together, and I see we've got some questions and observations coming in. What do you see there that you'd like to share?
Well, let's see what I can find really quickly. We have one question. Let's see. It's the age-old question. Let me bring us all back. It's the age-old question. How do you educate the... Oh, that's a good one. It's the age-old question. How do you educate the public to be media literate? I mean, I can think of so many programs started by newspapers and magazines to get their readers to understand the work they do better and understand that they're trying not to be biased. So yeah, how do you educate the public to know that maybe to watch for the AI generated content, or at least just to be aware? Is there a easy way to do that?
That's a good question. Any of the panelists want to jump in on that?
Educating is about producing good journalism and good content about it. Like it's not like, and that's like how you would be educating, but it's not media education. It's more like an understanding of what are the possibilities and threats, a bit what Garance is working on. I think that's one good path. Like, you know, if you have more journalists investigating and reporting on these topics, and like they talk about what are the challenges, and like a bit what has been mentioned before, how does it affect me? Why should I care? And this, like, how can I distinguish, you know, producing good journalism that allows like anyone who's following the news, like, to understand these things, you know, and then like understand and simplify very complex topics. And like, because everyone is talking these days about ChatGPT, and I said, oh, will this affect schools? Will this affect, well, but how would education evolve? Then talk to people in the school, in the education field, and then what are the programs, and like, how is it being used at the moment? So there are many things in which like it goes back to the role of journalism more than just only media literacy. I think it's more like, how are we reporting the information? How are we presenting the news? And like to decide that we, for instance, what we have done too is like, if we are using this in our journalism, then how are we transparent with the audience about it? And so the audience understand, how has it been used? Can I trust what this journalist wrote about or not? Like, and then you figure out, like in our case, it was one portion of a larger process where we had like, I don't know, hundreds of journalists working together. And this was like a tool that helped us advance in our reporting. And we looked at many other different things that are like standard, also journalistic processes. But I think that's, I'll keep it there, but I think that's part of my take on that question.
Interesting observation from one of our viewers, Sam Friedman. He says, AI can't go into the field, interview people, offer first-person observations by the on-site reporter. And then he asks, isn't that one way journalists can differentiate themselves and maintain their value? Thoughts from anybody? Daniel, excuse me, Ian, I see you've got your hand up.
I was actually thinking about this earlier. So there's a very prominent journalist in the UK who broke the SVB UK side of the story, of that being Silicon Valley Bank being taken over by the HSBC, a chap called Mark Kleiman who works for Sky News. Now, I've read a few profiles on Mark, and he phones about 50 people per day all around the city of London, and he has those relationships. But I'm going back to the video that I saw earlier, my own experience with AI. It is possible, although not in the near future, that he could effectively program an AI of his own voice and then get them to phone his key contacts, as long as he's got the phone book. I just wanted to put that out there as a thought experiment. So I do think it's possible that's replicated, but not in the near future.
You know, there's just so many different aspects to this. I'm just going to throw in one that's actually a little visual. I'm going to screen share again. very early in my career, I worked in radio news. And when I made the transition over to television, I worked with actually another Deadline Club past president. He made me the audience tonight, Ray Weiss. He'd spent many years with PBS's McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour here in the US. And he always reminded me coming from radio, that with television, indeed any visual medium, you always have to ask yourself, what is the picture? Let me jump in here and screen share this with you. So I thought it would be fun as part of our evening to visit several text-to-image generators and see what images get generated when we type in the words, quote, artificial intelligence and journalism, end quote. And here were the results. We chose 3 of them. The first is Stable Diffusion. They returned 4 images. They get my personal award. We actually thought 2 of them were so cool that we decided to use them in the promotion for this panel on the webinar. So nice job, Stable Diffusion. This I didn't really get. This is stockimage.ai. It did generate, even though the address says stock image, that is an AI generated image of some kind that is supposed to represent artificial intelligence and journalism. I give it a B-. And this next one, Melobytes. What in the world is that? That looks like a pig wearing some kind of an artificial brain helmet. I mean, that last one is just downright bizarre. Thoughts from the panel on any of this? I mean, to me, this field is still in its infancy. And when I see images, especially like these last 2, I wonder if it's going to remain in its infancy. Anybody?
Well, I'll just jump in quickly to say, I think, again, we're going back to the age-old question of what's the data that was used to build this image stock, right? Like, and how is it that often when we Google AI, we get images of white men? Not to be too provocative here, but I think that that's always a question to keep in mind. Like, what are these AI systems really built from? And I mean, this is going to pose a huge set of questions in the artistic realm, right? I know of one publisher in California who started generating AI images simply to illustrate news stories. He runs a really small shop, and this is, you know, giving him some art to put on the page, but he's always very transparent about the fact that this is an AI generated image. So just kind of going back to your previous question, Steve, I think that transparency really is the key and the key differentiator for us as journalists, to be able to show in our work what we do and don't know about these systems, how we use these systems, what, you know, element of our reporting they contributed, and to just be, you know, as helpful as possible to our readers and viewers as they seek to understand the world that they live in now, really to empower them with the limits as well as the capabilities of these technologies. And that's tough when you're having to describe really complex statistics in simple terms, but I think it's a task worth doing if we're all going to participate in our democracies and understand this really interesting future we are living in.
I'm going to ask Justin Gluska to chime in here, because this is an issue we haven't addressed head on yet. Journalists need tools for distinguishing reality from fakery, and that clearly becomes more difficult in an environment where so much content is going to be generated by AI in the future. So how do we verify what we're looking at? Justin, you wrote a blog post on a critical angle to this very subject, how to tell if something is written by AI. Are there, you know, what do you use for that? Do you use a computer program to distinguish if something's written by a computer program? Or what do you do? What are your hacks? What do you recommend?
So AI by itself, like there's no receipt that gets stapled onto like text that's made with AI. It's kind of just like text. But the way that you predict it, so human writing itself is very creative, very it has a lot of perplexity and elements in it that are kind of random in a way. Of course, there's good ways of writing, but really good human writing is very complex. And at this current time, we're not at the point where these AI models are as creative and engaging as a human is. They're still pretty good. They're actually very good, but We're still not at that completely human replace level yet, kind of like what we saw earlier with the video. The video AI felt too natural. And that's kind of what this whole thing comes down to, is AI itself is based on patterns and recognizing what it's learned, what it's been trained on. And so today you can use some tools. My analogy is, I believe it's kind of similar to how people get caught cheating in chess. So if you have a machine that is able to predict your next move and can consistently do that over and over again, or let's say like you're playing and then this machine is kind of tracking what you're doing, if the machine would do exactly what you would do infinite amount of times, theoretically, you're most likely playing, or you're most likely cheating in that example. And so for AI to run text through, there's a bunch of different websites that have tools to check. And what they do is you will paste in your own sample text, and these machines will try to recreate it themselves. And to the degree that an AI will create, like if you like to say, the best part of my day is when I go to blank, and now take that, expand it, a bunch of times, and let AI just keep writing based on what it would write. If you match that very similar with what a human would write, human text is not going to be similar to whatever that output will be, because that output is very predictable. And that's why ChatGPT is so great at writing about things like history and about just kind of static events that don't change, things that are very concrete. But when you bring it into more of a news sense and of an opinionated sense, it's not really good at doing that, because it's not like if you train it on a bunch of textbooks, it's going to repeat the same thing a bunch of times. But the way you check for right now is basically by saying, how different is the text that is pasted into this checking box different than what the AI would have came up with if we asked it kind of the same question in some kind of way, if that makes sense. And right now we're at a point where we kind of can tell. The longer of the sample that you put in, you can get like a prediction, but you really can't definitively say. I know there's going to be like lawsuits coming up of like colleges suspending students, saying, you wrote this with AI. I had an article, a comment from someone saying like, my son was detected of cheating, but he wasn't. And like, I don't really know how to respond to that, because like there's no like beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, unless you're like mirroring 99% of what an AI would say, you really don't know. And I think the part where it's like kind of scary now is not really today, because you can still evade it in a way by like just producing content that's more nuanced and complex and has these different syntactical structures than what is like predicted or written by AI. But I'm scared for 2 years from now. I'm scared for 20 years from now, because these models are just going to get better and better at being able to seem more natural, just like the video program we saw earlier. That's going to get even better, and learn to add natural pauses and learn to add things that truly just make you seem, in a way you kind of have to not untrain it, but like add natural variability to it, because we don't want perfection. So yeah, it's not really anything definitive, but there's definitely tools to predict it. I think a big sector that's going to be disrupted though is education, but that's kind of a conversation for another day. But yeah.
I'm old enough to remember blue book exams where you actually had to sit in a proctor, the proctor watching you write the essay from memory. So maybe those days will come back. Bob Anthony, any thoughts? And I know we've got quite an active chatbot going on here. Not chatbot, chat box. Is there anything there that you'd like to relay and maybe throw at the panelists?
I'll look through the questions, but I'm obviously impressed at the evolution of speech recognition and the ability to respond to what you put into a computer. I mean, I'm old enough to remember this original Radio Shack speech tool. It was very expensive in the Radio Shack catalog. And for those who used it, I heard it was very, very bad. You practically had to shout into it and got nothing right. And then the evolution to Amazon's, I don't want to say the Amazon voice assistant's name, because if I say it, half the people who are listening will have something go off in their houses. So I won't do that either. So the evolution has astounded me. ChatGPT basically blew me away. I just couldn't believe that it could put together such a quality response, even though the response is almost always, and I'm a copy editor, in addition to the other things I do, there was always a copy editing glitch in it. Yes, the Brooklyn Dodgers left Brooklyn because of financial reasons, because they couldn't find the land, because the city wouldn't build them a stadium. and because it said the city of Brooklyn wouldn't build them a stadium. You know, Brooklyn hasn't been a city since 1898. So it had little nits like that. I'm astounded just by the evolution of things in the short time that we've known about ChatGPT and some of these AI avatars. So let me take a look at the questions, but I'll let you or the rest of the panel chime in while I try to pull some questions from the audience.
Any thoughts from the other panelists on what Bob just said? Yeah, Amelia, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to briefly say or comment particularly on that voice recognition thing that Rob was mentioning, just because, yes, it has evolved, but again, to what Garance was talking and we have been talking, input data, like it works very well with a proper, very well, for instance, if you're trying English, very well English accent. But if you go with all the variabilities and you go with all the different ways people can speak English, then it still gets not so good with many different variations of that and like locations and like how good and how much you can get. And if you can see if you want to transcribe an interview, if you interview someone who is like native English speaker, like on top, like I don't know, best accent, like one of any of these programs that we hear like speaks, then you will get everything perfect. But when you're getting all this diversity of languages, and I'm not going to land in like when you're trying to move from one language to another, then it gets even more complex. So I think there is a lot of progress in that, but still, like again, like what are we using as training sets, and are we taking into account all the full universe and all the variabilities and all the diversity that we have of people and voices and accents when we're talking about these topics?
I'm seeing an interesting observation from one of our viewers, Alan Corwin. Let's see, suggesting any regulation for free speech, as was mentioned, even for AI is concerning, but would use of AI without clear notification constitute fraud? And if so, what penalty or legal action might be appropriate? And he actually sent us an update to that. Could the panelists respond? You know, yeah, he actually wants to, he's rephrasing this as a statement, quote, release of AI without clear notice should be fraud and subject to penalties by statute, and this would be a proper role for legislation. Any thoughts on that from the panelists?
Yeah, I spoke to Charlie Beckett at the London School of Economics about this, about flagging AI in articles, because we saw it being a thing and in academic journals. And actually, to be honest, I regard it as another technological tool. You know, Amelia was just mentioning there about translators or dictaphone translators or the like. So actually, I would challenge that. I don't see that as fraud. I see it as using as a tool. And I think rather than sort of flagging it in such a way or schools rejecting this, I think we need to embrace it. And as we discussed earlier, to have proper education around it and have a sophisticated conversation, we need to understand it better. I think a legal framework putting around it would not be helpful in that regard anyway, in that particular one.
At the end of the day, would it even be enforceable, panelists? Any thoughts on that? I mean, you know, it would be the honors system. You're going to put something out and say it's AI. You could, as Justin said, unless you've got a very sophisticated computer program, it could be missed that it's AI.
I mean, with me, Steve, I mean, you know, as old reporters as ourselves, not the rest of the panel, attribution is always the big word. Attribute, attribute, attribute. Say where you got the quote from, say where you got the data from. And if it's AI generated or AI assisted, you need to drop that at the bottom of the story or somewhere in the story. You know, AP does do that. So CNET does it now. CNET got into trouble because some of the stories were generated without really cluing everybody in as to how they were generated. Regulatory penalties for doing such? No. Now you're bringing the government into regulating the press, and you never want to do that in terms of saying what constitutes attribution or not, what standard they're going to apply, and that can be politically swayed one way or the other. So I'd be afraid, I'd be equally afraid of that. But you know, attribution, let people know where it's coming from, in the same way that you say, "This is Steve Dunlop. Have a good night." You know, let people know where it's from.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question for Justin at this point. Justin, you work in the private sector. You work with companies that are developing websites and so forth. What are you hearing from the private sector right now, your client base, about AI? Is everybody all excited about it? Is it really the next big thing, or are they just more concerned about, updating the website to make sure that their scripts aren't polluted or malfunctioning?
So I work more with law firms right now. I've actually been doing a lot of work with them, and that's a whole separate scenario of how accurate is the content, because then we go into a whole talk about fact checking. But something that I feel like with an extensive kind of knowledge in SEO and how search engines are run, I think Google is kind of 5-10 steps ahead of what anyone thinks that they're doing. They actually just came out with an update which patched something they said previously, that AI is actually allowed now, which I don't really know how they'd be able to get around anyways. But it's not really about what something is written with, it's more of the quality of the content that it is. And Google has this black box of determining how good words are on a page together. And so the clients that I work with are not really concerned about AI. I mean, if anything, they see this as an advantage, because there's going to be a huge wave of people flooding the internet with a bunch of garbage content, writing these stories and even more factual things that just aren't really that extensively researched. And so I think the perfect solution is actually using them in tandem and having human expertise merge with using AI to help you maybe boost the mundane things about writing, like introduction paragraphs or conclusions, and even maybe sprinkling it here and there if you get stuck with some things. But a lot of the people that I've been working with are kind of mixed excitement about it. Is like, yes, let's add it to our workflow, but if we remain publishing quality content and we do this consistently, we'll create blogs that are going to be successful, or well, it's not really blogs, it's more brands for companies. But I do think there's going to be a flood of a bunch of content that's not good, and if you can kind of get above that now, you're going to be doing even better than people that don't. So I think more people just kind of want to integrate it with their lives, sprinkle it on certain things that they're using. But I think we're too early for people to fully make the switch from being scared of it or fully jumping into it, of relying on it. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, well, there's so many aspects to this. And in fact, one of our viewers, Catherine Harris, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that last name. This is an interesting angle. She asks, and this is for the whole panel, to what degree should journalists start to use AI programs to analyze and rate the honesty of the speech used by sources and possibly provide that information to readers? Such tools are used today in the financial world to assess the trustworthiness of CEOs and CFOs during earnings calls. Any thoughts, panelists?
I think we need to go to multiple sources. It's part of our work. Instead of questioning how credible or not, part of our work is doing just not going to one single source. So if we get a piece of information, when we bring more voices, we will be able to contrast. We go and find documents and we do the reporting. So I think that's how it's not about we are not judges. So we are not judging our sources. We try to find how all the sources possible to do our reporting. So I think we are not going to be the judges of how reliable a source is or not using an AI. We are going to provide and do the right reporting to contrast all the information and find what kind of information can we fact check, verify, how many sources can we find that confirm information, and so on. So I think we need to do our job and do the reporting instead of using an AI tool to see did this source lie to me or not. I would say if we have doubts about any piece of information we get, we need to continue doing our reporting and find more sources.
Just to piggyback on that, though, what it seems to me that what Catherine's suggesting almost sounds like a new website, because any journalist or any individual actually can troll the internet, look for sound bites of politicians. Are they telling me the truth? Are they being honest? And run them through an AI program and print the results. I mean, Bob Anthony, that's, I don't know, that would seem to cut human analysis completely out of the equation, at least for people who are interested in seeing that kind of thing.
It's interesting because you and I, we read these press releases, these dense financial reports from these CEOs, and a lot of times the lead is way buried at the bottom, or somehow filtered in the somehow not not brought out as salient. It's not salient. You can't see it right at the top of the stories. I can see where an AI would be good for pulling out the news somewhere buried in the language that what did the people at UPI call it? Downholding? That was another word used for layoffs back in the old days. They now have a downhold club full of old UPI people who got laid off. An AI could like go through that type of wording and pull out the fact, hey, there's a 40% reduction here that's couched in flowery language. I could see where that would be a help. Of course, you still want the human being there translating that jargon into English, making that final decision. You don't want to leave that to an AI, because you could have somebody could bring in a foreign phrase that means something completely different, and an AI might take it completely out of context. That would be the danger there. I'm a tech guy. I would love to see tech being used for such things, but yeah, you still need to have that editor handy, that human element handy to make sure things are copacetic. And I see we have about 10 minutes left, so I just want to make sure we stay on time.
Yeah, I've got one more question I see on the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go to Ian. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I think it's just to emphasize a point about the context and base knowledge for journalists when we're looking at fact checking. I was just going to give a quick and infamous example from the UK, from the EU referendum. There was a vote leave bus going around the country with Boris Johnson on it. And on the side, it says every year we give £350 million to the EU. Now, if you put that through ChatGPT or the like, it's either going to come back with yes or no. But it's actually a little bit more complex than that, because that's the outgoing. It wasn't the net number. And there's a massive debate in the UK at the time. Numerous fact-checking websites kicked up a fuss about it. But I just wanted to raise that because it alludes to the context and base knowledge of some of the claims that are put out there by CEOs, politicians, and others. You do need that human there checking that.
William Schmidt, past Deadline Club president, also added to the chat. He says, could we preserve breaking news and all timely reporting tasks as human turf while having AI quickly look up, organize, and narrate background stories and sidebars that give the history and context of a story? In other words, could journalists consciously say, you know what, breaking news, we're gonna make sure humans are in charge of that, and maybe for the back of the book sort of pieces, maybe that's where AI is best deployed. Any thoughts on that from the panelists? And Garance, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say, actually, at AP, we have been using AI to help write earnings reports since 2014. So that's quite a long time ago. But I think that, like you're saying, Bob, those are typically formatted in a particular way. And so an AI would know, in which section of the filing to look for, specific numbers about revenue, et cetera. And I think that in that sense, to the question, there's been some really interesting examples of efforts to get AI to analyze meeting minutes and city council documents posted online that also typically have that kind of similar format, so that the AI could just surface nuggets for reporters. But then reporters, of course, would be the ones determining if that's in fact news. So just to echo again Amelia's point, I think it's so important to have we, the journalists, be the ones who are doing the fact checking, corroborating across multiple sources. And I personally would be very worried about, solely relying on a tool that would tell me if someone was being honest. That sounds like not necessarily the best way to go, especially heading into, important worldwide elections coming up.
We're heading into the home stretch here. Just got a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to quickly summarize any closing thoughts they might have in about 30 seconds. Let's see, who goes first? Ian, any closing thoughts on this on this exciting but very disturbing technology in many respects?
I'll keep it brief. It's all about trust within the newsroom, trust of consumers, and trust of the wider society. And that's the question that we should keep asking about AI.
Amelia, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's an exciting moment for journalism, and we need to keep asking ourselves, how can it help us, and actually how can we report on it? So, and how can we be transparent about our processes and to be critical too? So, and not forget about the whole essence of journalism. So we still need to do the reporting. We still need to talk to people, and this will be an additional tool that can help empower our work on one side, but it can also have consequences in society. So we need to figure out better ways, and there are many people, great people doing things like that these days, but how can we investigate it? Because that's an important topic that is going to be it's already part of the present and definitely be part of the future. So how can it help us, and how can we investigate it? I think those are some of the key thoughts.
Okay, Justin, 30 seconds. What are your thoughts in closing?
I think we're at a really interesting time in society. It's really exciting, but I think the biggest takeaway is to make sure to maintain ethical and a moral compass about everything going on, whether it's individually or how we create things, how companies create things, actually. But it's very exciting.
Garance, next to last word before Bob.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think we're living in a really exciting time for journalism as well as for governments and private sector companies. We're all looking for shortcuts, and AI may provide some of those. But again, the thing that I began with, I'll close with, which is how these technologies work, what's really going on under the hood is what's most important. And that can really help fuel our investigative journalism around the role that algorithmic technologies play in our societies, the families and people they're already impacting, and potential biases there. And it can also really help us to harness these technologies for use in our work, fuel better open source reporting, deepen our data science capabilities as journalists. And as long as we're being transparent about all of this, I think there's a great potential both to have real world impact and to improve our journalism.
Okay, thank you, Garance. And Bob Anthony, last word.
Yes, I'm looking forward to see where AI will go. I'm looking forward to see if we need to stay in contact and know who's doing the developing of the technology, where the databases are, what databases are we pulling from, and what humans are involved. That's the important thing. We have to maintain a human contact to this very cool but very easily misused technology.
What a discussion. I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in for this great discussion on AI and the future of journalism. For those of you who are new to the Deadline Club, I'd like to encourage you to check us out online at deadlineclub.org. As one of SPJ's largest chapters, serving New York area journalists since 1925. And by the way, that 90% figure, 90% of all AI, of all online content is going to be AI by 2025. That'll be the club's 100th anniversary. What a present. Anyway, the Deadline Club is dedicated to perpetuating freedom of the press, encouraging the highest standards of excellence in ethics, and fostering career development through its awards, scholarships, workshops, talks, and social networking mixers. On March 23rd, just a short time away, you can join us for lunch at New York's Manhattan Manor on West 52nd Street to help us induct 6 new members of the New York Journalism Hall of Fame. And they are clockwise on the screen from the upper left: Robert Caro, Ken Aletta, Anthony Mason, Edith Lederer, Carol Simpson, and Gay Talese. Quite a lineup. For more information, just go to our website, deadlineclub.org, and click on the Events tab. And if you missed any part of tonight's discussion, you can also go to deadlineclub.org to access the replay right from the homepage in the coming days. And again, final thanks to my co-moderator, Robert Anthony, and our panelists. I'm Steve Dunlop in New York. Thank you again, and good night.